All right. Without going all social media podcast influencer here on you, I think we greatly underestimate our ability as individuals to manage and process change. And I think a great example of this, not for everybody, but for a lot of people, will be becoming a parent. And as a guy, I can only speak to the male side of this, but you think about going through that process and the pregnancy and all the stuff you have to get ready and the classes and building the crib and all of that. But you're going through all that and you're still, husband and wife. And then all of a sudden, within a couple of hours, you go from husband and wife to mom and dad. And that is instant and that is forever, every day, 24 hours a day. There is no off switch, right? And you think about that is crazy to back when the infant stages, the first couple of weeks, and like, what the hell are you doing? You're just laying on the floor drooling. You have no concept of reality, but somehow we manage, right? We just manage. We figure it out as we go along. And I think about that back to like a move scenario, right? When I was in my 20s, I moved from Green Bay, Wisconsin to Chicago. And I started a job in Chicago that was 100% commission. I didn't know a single person. And somehow I figured it out and I made the best of it and made friends and made money and did all that. I moved from Chicago to Dallas, hardly knew anybody, same thing. New city, single, didn't really know people. Somehow figured it out, built a whole life there, met my wife, we had our family. I think everybody has examples like that where you can process huge change. Perhaps someone, a loved one that maybe had, sickness like a cancer or something like that. And maybe they're around, maybe they're not. People's resiliency to fight through all that. So I think we underestimate our ability to manage change. I think we get hung up too easily on not liking the change necessarily, or just not liking change, period. And I think if we can push through that part and get to the point where we can accept that change is going to happen and then see the change for what it is, as opposed to just being resentful of the fact that there's change, I think that's when, to use the word change again, because I've only said it 3,000 times, I think that's when change can actually start to happen and we can adapt to it and move forward. And I really don't want to have to say the word change anymore after this. On the subject of change, I'm over that word. On the subject of change, I was thinking about this and I asked my mom, because she lives with us now, speaking of change. I asked her how many places she lived over the course of her life. And I think she came up with 5 or 6. Like she lived in, granted my mom is in her 70s, so different time, but she basically lived in the house she was raised in all the way into her 20s, mid 20s, until she met my dad and they got married. And I think they had 1 or 2 apartments. And then the house that I grew up in, and they had that for close to 40 years. And then my mom had a house in Texas and now she lives with us. So there's 5 or 6, different living situations. And every time that you move, you're going to deal with some change. Even if you move in the same city, you're moving to a different part of the city or town. You're moving to a different setup. Bedrooms and layouts of apartments and houses and all that are different. So my mom lived in like 5 or 6 places. I asked my wife, she was probably in like 13 or 14. And I did the math on mine and I was at like 17 different places over the course of my lifetime that I lived in. And I wasn't counting dorms in college. So when you think about that, our ability to process change and deal with it and just adapt is astounding. And especially if people take different jobs, for example, or even different careers. I went from working in transportation to working in culinary to being a cook. And now I'm back in sort of a corporate environment where I'm doing some outside sales and that kind of a thing. So a lot of different change. And I'm curious to know what other people have gone through and how they were able to process and overcome change and deal with change. And in corporate world, you talk about it as change management, new processes, new software tools, new email procedures, whatever. People are always going to gripe about it. It doesn't matter what the change is. They're just going to be upset because it's change. And that translates to our personal life as well. So it's going to be uncomfortable, right? And I would tell my daughter, change is uncomfortable. Embrace that, because that's where you have an opportunity to learn about yourself and also learn about others. If you're in a group where a group of people are experiencing change, you will very quickly see people's true colors, and you will see what people are made out of when they get pushed to a little uncomfortable. Not even a lot uncomfortable. We're just talking a little uncomfortable. And it's amazing. And we're not even talking about people's egos and all that. That's a whole separate discussion. But you think about people that have to deal with change, whether it's at work or personal or relationship or whatever. You see people's true colors. And that isn't to paint people in a bad light, because none of us should be defined by some of our worst moments. We should have an opportunity at redemption within reason. But when you think about that, you really can see what people are made of and how people operate. And that can be very, very eye-opening. So with that, I want everybody to think, how many places have you lived in? How many different apartments or houses or dorm rooms or whatever have you lived in? And what was all that like? And when you think about, how did you move from one place to the other? What drove you to do that? Was it a financial decision? Was it for work? Was it relationship? Did you just not like where you were living and wanted to change? I think all of that is really interesting, and it sheds a light into our past and helps us understand how we got to where we are now. I think about all the different apartments that I moved into when I lived in Dallas and when I was single. And, my eye was always on, I wanted the next cooler, the best, the better view, the better apartment, the this or that. And it's like, what a waste. For me, not that you can't want nice things and want to keep moving up, but when your priorities are that out of whack and all you're focused on is the cool materialistic stuff without any balance, man, you can burn through a lot of money. You can make a lot of bad decisions, and you can put yourself in a lot of bad situations. So for what? For the few times that you have people over that you hope they're impressed with your 1-bedroom apartment? I don't know.